Hello. It's Friday already. Last day of school. Well, hopefully not for... I'll be here tomorrow for Saturday morning cartoons, I hope. Anyway, in this period between the start of the Thelemic Holy Days, which is March 20th, and the Feast of the Supreme Ritual and the Feast of the Equinox of the Gods, and the period that started, or we at least celebrate, that starts April 8th, with the first day of the writing of the Book of the Law. When we go back in and try to get some idea of what was going on with Rose and Crowley's wife Rose in Cairo, in preparation for the events that would result in the writing of the Book of the Law, it's really confusing. And Crowley, in the Equinox of the Gods, confesses, I've got a great memory, but I can't remember exactly what was going on in detail, blow by blow, because he was trying to piece it together like 17 years later in his head. And he had a couple little diaries. He had a little Japanese vellum diary, and he had another magical record. Plus, we have to take into account that Crowley, even years later, had an agenda that we don't know about, that would make him at the time feel that he should obfuscate exactly what was going on, either that it didn't sound mystical enough, or it was bound to be misinterpreted as something that didn't want to fit the narrative as he wanted to put forward, or what. But it's really confusing. And if we wanted to set a real live liturgical calendar of the events, we're really hard pressed to recreate that calendar from Crowley's scattered documents that he confesses are full of blinds and confusions and things like that. So I'm not going to jump right back into the Equinox of the Gods narrative until a little closer to the writing of the Book of the Law. And then I'm going to go back into the text and share little comments that Crowley said about many of the individual lines of the Book of the Law that we don't usually take into account. But there's one thing that I did share with you before. Hang on. But I want to remind you that Crowley said, let's see, and I'm reading from the commentaries of the holy books. Let's see. The Book of the Law claims to answer all possible religious problems. One is struck by the fact that so many of them are stated and settled separately in so short a space. Now get this. Especially when we are understandably disturbed by many of the implications that the third chapter might suggest to us when we start putting two and two together and coming out 16. It reconciles cosmological concepts which transcend time and space with a conventional historical point of view. So he's saying that Book of the Law is covering two subjects, if you will. Now, they may be happening simultaneously at the time in 1904, but one is the cosmological concept, and the other is the historical point of view. And remember, we're talking early 20th century. Okay. In the first place, that's the cosmological, in the first place, it announces unconditional truth. But in the second, that's the historical part, in the second, is careful to state that the magical formula or system of principles on which the practical part of the book is based is not an absolute truth, but one relative to the terrestrial time of the revelation. It's a strong point in favor of the book that it makes no pretense to settle the practical problems of humanity once and for all. It contents itself with indicating a stage in evolution. Okay, I'm going to read that several times over the next few days. Anyway, yesterday I read from a volume, what volume is it, of a series that Weiser, actually I encouraged Weiser to do this, the Best of the Equinox series. I asked the question on my Facebook page this morning, do you own and have in your library Equinox Volume 1, numbers 1 through 10? If you have that, you don't need this. Or do you have something Israel Regardie came out with in, what, 1974 or something like that, that at first Llewellyn published. It was called Gems from the Equinox. Do you have that in your library? If you do, you don't need this, okay? And do you have a real big sort of collateral material from Crowley in your library? Do you have a big, say, a book 4? Or do you have not only Magic and Theory and Practice, but do you have The Vision and the Voice? Do you have the Blue Equinox? Do you have a good Crowley library? If you've already got a really good, extensive Crowley library, then you don't need this. Okay. In 3 volumes, I've gathered what I at least consider the most pertinent magical stuff from the Equinox series. I left out all the book reviews. I leave out all of the poetry from Crowley and others. I leave out the entire Voice of the Silence by Blavatsky, but that's in the Equinox, and it's in Gems from the Equinox. But what I do include are the things that were important to me as I was learning and studying and continuing to study magic. I've broken into 3 categories. One was dramatic ritual, because I find out the rites of Aloysius is one of the most important and practical parts of the Equinox series. Sex magic, and Enochian magic. Now, I'm just, before I end today, I'm going to read a little something from the Enochian magic, best of the equinox thing. Now, I got to remind you that these are very inexpensive paperback books, and it's a very inexpensive way to get hardcore equinox material. And don't criticize the publication project by saying that I only wrote the introductions and stuff, and I curated it. Oh, big deal, you know. No, you're not buying this for me. Okay, you're not buying this for my contribution, little short introduction and stuff. You're buying this for Crowley. You're buying this for the equinox, or you're owning this, or somebody's going to give it to you. You know. Anyway, I'm on my soapbox today. But today I'm reading from the Enochian material. Most importantly, this contains the entire vision and the voice. Okay, it makes up the bulk of the latter section of this book, anyway, and Liber Chanok and all of the Enochian material from the equinox. It's enough material to get you well on your way in performing Enochian magic. But anyway, here's my little introduction, and then class will be dismissed. One does not need to be a practicing ceremonial magician to be interested in Enochian magic. The subject has something for everyone. Historians, scholars, Hollywood filmmakers bask in the radiant person of its creator, Dr. John Dee, a towering figure who, along with being one of the most influential political advisors to and spy for Queen Elizabeth I. Dee developed this complex magical system in the 16th century in England. Linguists such as Dr. Donald Laycock, 1936 through 1988, he's a linguist, mind you, are fascinated with the angelic tongue, a true language that was allegedly delivered by angels to Dee and his partner, Edward Kelly, under extraordinary circumstances. If magic is your cup of tea, nothing compares to the breathtaking elegance of the Enochian system. My interest in Enochian magic began late in 1979, and I began practicing in earnest in the fall of 1980. It's remained the centerpiece of my magical work ever since. The text I would first use as my instruction manual was the same collection of documents you will find in this book. Material that in the late 1970s could only be found in the pages of Crowley's Equinox Volume 1, or in my case, the newly published Gems from the Equinox. And I think I've got the date there, so if we want to put that was 1969 was the date that Llewellyn was, that was 1974. It was curated by Israel Regardie in the same way I curated this series. So don't get mad at me because you haven't discovered that I haven't personally revealed the secret of the universe to you. You got to get that yourself. Okay, but I digress. There was very little else available at the time to supplement the Equinox material. Israel Regardie had published certain Golden Dawn papers, but frankly, at the time they did no more to they did no more to obfuscate the subject for me than offered any helpful insight. As difficult as Equinox Enochian material appeared to me, I proceeded to tackle it as if it were the first and last word on the subject. As my mastery of Enochiana grew, so did my appreciation of Crowley's profound grasp of his subject and what he chose to include in the Equinox. There's enough information in the documents herein bound for the student to grasp the system, build and understand the various tablets and tools, and immediately begin to practice Enochian vision magic. However, I strongly encourage the reader who intends to engage in the practice to become acquainted with several fine texts that have been published in the last 20 years, especially those written or edited by magicians who actually practice the art rather than those who simply write about it. I do not hesitate to point the reader to the online works of Mr. Clay Holden and the writings of Jeffrey James, Stephen Skinner, David Rankin, David Jones, Robert Turner, Frater W.I.T., and Joseph Peterson. And since then, there's been, Llewellyn has published a massive Enochian work, too, that the author or the editor escapes me at the moment. But there's more Enochian stuff out there. Lots of it. It's a huge, like $700 thing. Never mind. There is a singular shortcoming to the Equinox documents dealing with Enochian magic. There's little discussion of John Dee and Edward Kelly in the circumstances of the reception of the original material. My years of practice have convinced me that awareness of where it all came from is very important. In my book, Enochian Vision Magic, that's Wiser, I spent a great deal of time integrating early Dee and Kelly workings into the theory and practice of modern Enochian magic. I certainly do not intend to preface this book by reprinting that rather thick volume, but rather I hope with sheepish and mock humility that the reader who has not already purchased and read Enochian Vision Magic will do so at the earliest possible convenient moment. See how shameless I am at self-promotion? In the early 1990s, I was asked by Herman Slater of the Magical Child bookstore and Magical Child Publishing in New York City to write an introduction to his beautifully produced facsimile edition of some of the diaries of John Dee that were originally gathered and published in 1659 as a true and faithful relation of what passed for many years between John Dee and some spirits. What he wanted was simple enough, a brief introduction to John Dee, who he was, what he was trying to do with his magic, and how the text survived the centuries to be picked up by adepts of the Golden Dawn in the late 1800s, then to Aleister Crowley in the first half of the 20th century. I did the best I could, at least for a young man beginning his writing career. The print run of this expensively produced edition was very small and unfortunately never saw a reprint or a second edition. These many years later, I was asked to introduce the Enochian material from the Equinox for this Best of the Equinox series. I immediately thought that even though my old introduction was originally written to comment on Dee's diaries, it would be nevertheless also perfectly set the stage for this work. The publisher has agreed, and so I've included it below. Enochian magic isn't for everyone. But I hope whatever your involvement may be in this most complex and elegant magical art form, whether it be as a practitioner, a dabbler, or dilettante, that you'll be touched by its beauty and transformed by its magic. And that was my short, little, brief introduction. And I include my introduction to the Magical Child True and Faithful Relation. I'm not going to read that to you, but if you're interested in it and can find a copy of that, you can also find that introduction in my Allow Me to Introduce. And if you can find an original hardbound copy of the Magical Child edition, you'll find it in there too. And, of course, you'll find it in the Enochian Magic volume of Best of the Equinox. How's that for a Friday plug? You know, I would just dedicate Fridays to commercial exploitation, and but I don't want to limit it to Fridays. Anyway, I hope you have a good weekend. It's absolutely beautiful for a change. It's cold, but it's beautiful in Sacramento. For those of you who are in the OTO, Ordo Templi Orientis, in the United States, or anywhere, if you're an international member of other Grand Lodges around the world, the National Convention that usually takes place every 2 years, of course it didn't take place last year, is going ahead, and it's happening in Denver in August, in early August, I think like the 3rd through the 6th or something like that. If you're interested in attending that for no other reason than it's what with the pandemic and the climate change and the world coming to an end like this, it's a historical event. So you might want to check the United States Grand Lodge, Ordo Templi Orientis, for more details on Noticon, and to, if interested, get your registration in. Anyway, that's it for today. See you tomorrow for Saturday morning cartoons. Until then, continue to be good to yourself, be good to each other. Do what thou wilt. Shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.